of course, Nick needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, he is the CEO and president of the Oliver Wyman Group, with more than 20 years of experience consulting in the UK, continental Europe, and North America. He has also supported the World Economic Forum on the role of financial services in society, co-authored a number of articles and studies, including support for Her Majesty's Treasury in proposing a 10-year vision for global competitiveness of the UK financial service industry. I'm going to ask you how that is going in a moment. But he is also a keen advocate of inclusion and sponsor of diversity, and he sits on the firm's Inclusion Council. He is executive sponsor of Oliver Wyman's Racial and Ethnic Diversity Group and was named a top 20 advocate by Involve and Empower. Of course, our topic for this session is government strategic foresight. If such a thing exists, we're about to find out. Aligning policy with the future. Now, we've had a very interesting conversation yesterday in preparation of this session. I think since we both love war metaphors and war stories, one of my favorite books is called Art of War for Business. And one of my favorite quotes is actually by a World War II general, Omar Bradley, who says, "Strategy is for beginners, logistics is for professionals." Now, we are hearing too many strategies, too many visions, too many things being launched by governments, but not necessarily the logistics or the implementation. And from our conversation yesterday, I feel that you might agree with General Bradley. So could you tell us a little bit more about that gap?
I absolutely do, Faisal. And I think it was MacArthur who said that planning is useless, but plans are vital.
Yes.
Which comes down to sort of, the other side of the same coin. We're here to talk about foresight. And what we mean by this is not necessarily predicting the future. It's being able to thrive in a wide range of possible futures. And I think that's critical. I think what we see, particularly here in the region, I think very strongly, is the setting of national visions. Coming from the UK, I sometimes wish we had a stronger one.
Yes.
And I'm sure we may get onto that as well. But too quickly, as you said, we go from vision into detailed planning. And we think there's a whole load of stages that have to happen between those two things.
Like?
Well, so we would argue, Oliver Wyman in our work with governments would argue for a sort of cascade. Starts off with the priority setting and the vision setting, but then moves into what we call focused agendas. But what that means is, what are the agendas which are going to be given to the departments, to the ministries of government? How do we identify before the detailed planning goes on, where are there contradictions, where are there trade-offs? Quite often there's a contradiction between economic development and environmental sustainability, as you were touching on in the previous session. How do we resolve and seek to manage those contradictions before those are given out to two separate ministries? How do we identify where the pinch points are? Where are the potential problems from a fiscal perspective or from a legislative perspective? Then they should be assigned to the ministries. And also keeping in mind the need for cross-ministry bodies, different in each governance situation, but the need to tie together work across ministries. And then a challenge and check process once plans have been pulled together before you get into that detailed logistical planning. And I think one of the problems we see quite often is the confusion between legislation and policy. Policy should set the overall direction. Legislation is just something that is required to support policy. And then the final piece, which I think is probably the hardest thing, it's the hardest thing for individuals to do, never mind for institutions, is to learn by our failures. You've got to monitor, you've got to adjust, but we've got to be honest when something's working and when it's not, and learn from when it's not.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. Do you think we have, I mean, in this part of the world, in Saudi Arabia, where I come from, they have Vision 2030. The UAE, Dubai, for example, has D333. China has the Belt and Road Initiative. Do you think democracies are at a disadvantage in this case in terms of having a master plan, because take the US for example. The polarization, the divisions between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is so intense. I mean, literally, the first 10 days, I think, of President Biden's administration, he overturned a number of executive orders, including, for example, the definition of what Houthis, if they are terrorists or not. I know that's not the topic, but it's that extreme, I'm saying. So would you say democracies are at a disadvantage then, in terms of master plans of governments?
I mean, I think yes. I don't think intrinsically so. I think the state of democratic politics in some countries is sufficiently polar or polarizing, particularly democracies like my own and like the US, where you have a strong two-party system for whatever reason, whether it's the presidency, whether it's the first past the post democratic model in the UK. I think that can be a challenge, but I don't think it's an intrinsic one. I think that we've seen plenty of examples in strong democracies of good leadership towards a vision of sorts. But all the case studies you could give or I could give you from the last 5, 7, 10 years are probably not in Europe or North America.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about the UK, both because you are from there and I'm actually a big I'm a Londoner. I actually have a book coming out. It's called The Anecdotes of an Arab Anglophile. It's coming out in June. Please do get it. But that tells you where I stand. Yeah. Big fan of the UK, except that as somebody who is talking out of care, I don't think they have been doing very well in terms of politics, in terms of the revolving door at number 10. So to take it back to the title of the session, how can you have strategic foresight if you're not even sure who the prime minister is for the next year or so? Aligning policy with the future, really, we've seen the pandemic, we've seen Brexit, of course, pandemic is force majeure, Brexit was the will of the people, but I think the point is in both cases they were not predicted, yeah. And the response was not successful, to say the least.
So I think these are good examples where probably in many of our lives we find the urgent crowding out the important. And what's sort of happening now or going wrong now in the political sphere takes over from longer-term policy making. I think what's really, really important, and what perhaps we've not had a lot of headspace for in the UK in the last 4 or 5 years, is that division. You mentioned in my biography some of the work I did with the government around the financial services
yes.
strategy. So to tell you the story of that, it was the 16th of September 2008 when that exercise started. We gathered together 30 or 40 CEOs and chairs of the big financial institutions present in the UK. Now, the date 16th of September is vital because you may remember that on the 15th of September, Lehman Brothers went bust.
Correct.
And so we sat in the room when the late Alistair Darling was Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I tried to kickstart a conversation about 10 years' worth of future strategy. And everyone went, hang on, we're not sure the financial system's going to be here in 10 minutes, never mind 10 years. But I learned something quite important there, which was the Chancellor's leadership. We carved out the time to talk about the urgent, and we actually had a real, a serious conversation about what was going on in the US with emergency legislation, what that would mean for the UK system. But in the whole exercise, we still managed to carve out the time to do the longer-term thinking as well. And there were probably separate resources dedicated to each part of it. I don't think we've been doing a terribly good job of that more recently. It's felt more like political survival rather than longer-term vision setting.
And was it because of bad advice, or as many consultants that I speak to, people are happy to listen to the advice, pay for the advice, but when it comes to implementation, they do the complete opposite?
You mean in terms of the financial services strategy? Or?
To say.
I mean, I think Brexit has been probably not as damaging as we thought it might be, but not great. And that was, interestingly, at that point in 2008, that was not anticipated. I think if there had been more foresight work involved, if you think about the range of possible scenarios, I think actually it might have been more helpful. One of the things, the Montfleur scenarios in South Africa when apartheid was breaking down, And they came up with a set of future scenarios which helped really unify and rally quite disparate views on how to plot the path for the country overall. I think it wouldn't have taken enormous predictive powers or foresight powers to go from a financial crisis towards a feeling of displacement by an electorate, which might lead to outcomes that are more populist in nature. So it's in that case probably an absence of foresight, but an advertisement for maybe spending more time on it.
I mean, I hate to keep on drilling on the same point about democracies and the ability to be aligned with the future, because it's just a reality rather than a criticism that people are thinking in, or people in power at least are thinking in 4-year terms or 6-year terms, as opposed to something sustainable or something long term. Do you think consultants such as yourselves or your company can play a role in convincing or lobbying governments to think beyond those 4 terms? Because surely at some point the greater good has to prevail over the immediate party needs.
I mean, I think all advisors have to retain their humility, first of all, and be careful about the way they position themselves. But I do think that data and the presentation of analysis of data with integrity can be incredibly helpful at unlocking some of these things, because quite often these debates are polarized by people cherry-picking data.
Yeah.
People who are not spending the time to really rigorously analyze and dig deep. And certainly within Oliver Wyman, within Marshall McLennan, we pride ourselves on the power of our perspective to really pull it apart and actually say what the data tells us, even if it makes us unpopular. It's one of the most important things we can do with a client. If you just tell a client what they want to hear, they shouldn't be paying our fees. And so, yes, I do think that we can be useful in helping set that agenda. I think, just to pin back to that financial services work, one of the things that exercise tried to do was to hold up a mirror to the industry in the UK and say what it was doing well, which it was always talking about, but also what it was not doing well enough. So yeah, I hope that can be a force for positive and longer-term, more sustainable change.
As much as I would like to resist asking about AI, but it seems to be the dominant topic, and rightly so. I mean, I get this question quite a lot. Will AI put you out of business as a journalist? So it's now my turn to ask, do you think with the enormous capabilities that AI, we've just talking about the importance of data, is it going to be, well, why should I hire a consultant when, ChatGPT or whatever the equivalent is can give me the data that I want? Are you having that discussion in such an important industry such as yours?
So I think the answer is ChatGPT or generative AI will both enhance your job and put you out of work for all of us. It will do both those things. It holds all possibilities. And I'm an optimist. I think it will be a huge transformatory enhancement of human work. But certainly jobs will change enormously. And yeah, we are asking ourselves how advisory services, how data analytical services will change as a result of it. I'm actually more excited than I am worried. I think that the days where consultants were the sort of provider of access to previously opaque data are fairly long gone. While I agree with the MBA syllabus point that was made as part of the last conversation, everyone's got all their MBAs, everyone can handle their data. I think that ultimately for our business, I think it's a tool. And I think it will change the shape of we call it our pyramid, so the sort of seniority to juniority ratios. I think it will change that. But I think it is a tool which will allow us access more easily to more data and to refine that, but to partner it with our experience of supporting clients through their most transformative moments.
And of course, it's an additional evidence, if you want, to whatever you propose, because you could bring your data and then you can tell the client, fact check it yourself. I mean, numbers don't lie. Listen, I would love to. There's a lot I would love to talk to you, but we only have 10 seconds left, so I'm gonna have to leave it there, Nick. Unfortunately, thank you very much for your insights. If you have one final comment or piece of advice, I think we have 8 seconds.
If I had a final piece of advice, I would say think about future possible scenarios, at home and at work. Helps me.
Thank you so much.
Faisal, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.